In a world where trauma is real, where people seek out distraction from their internal lives and relationships with others, and where no one is taught healthy self-care, help was needed. In 2019, the mission began. Find a way to help people understand and better their mental health. Seek out ways to explore relationships and how they work. Fight against the stigmas that surround counseling and therapy. And, most importantly,
do all of that so you don't have to be a therapist to understand it. Hey everybody, welcome to Season 2 of Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me here in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Today's guest is Andy Gregorek. Andy is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Columbus, Ohio. She works with couples, individuals, and families to develop positive relationships with the self and others. And she does this through a personalized approach to treatment with a focus on trauma, emotional, cognitive, and developmental issues. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. There's a time when a man needs to fight, and a time when he needs to accept that his destiny is lost. The ship has sailed, and only a fool would continue. Truth is, I've always dimmed the lights, raised the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Andy, welcome back to the theater.
Thank you.
I am so glad to have you back on for a multitude of reasons, but I think probably one of the biggest of which is that when we did the last episode that we had you on with, which was number 16 back in season 1 last year, after we stopped recording, you shared with me that a celebratory event was on the horizon, and in the time that has passed since, that event has taken place, and you are now engaged to be married?
Yes, that is correct. We I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, but neither of us have ever been engaged, and my fiance and I knew that we were planning on getting married, and so last summer we took an impromptu trip to New York City because I'd never been. So we took a long weekend and just decided, hey, let's go see New York. And he proposed in Central Park in front of the Alice in Wonderland statue that's there, because that book is real central to our relationship and both of us as individuals. And so that came to pass, and we are going to be married this October, hopefully.
Wow. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the times that I went to visit Leanne in New York, we settled sitting on some of those statues, and we were there as well. It's a pretty cool little spot.
Yeah.
Also, let's see, we're working 3 weeks ahead here. So the episode that comes out before yours is on the Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland.
Nice.
So we did an episode on it.
That's exciting.
So married in October. I don't know what day this is at, but I highly recommend the 27th. Mainly just because it's my birthday, and why not tie two great events together?
Absolutely. We did set a date. It's looking like October 3rd. Of course, that's all tentative based on the state of things. But we wanted to get married in on Halloween because it falls on a Saturday this year, but our venue is in the middle of the biggest Halloween festival in Indianapolis. And so like if we had gotten married on the 31st in Indy at that place, we would have it would have been a nightmare because we would have been in the middle of a giant Halloween festival, which would have been cool.
Although, yeah, I was going to say, although Nightmare on Halloween, I mean, that's not a bad theme there.
No, it's not. But yeah, so
different kind of nightmare though. Different kind of
nightmare. I was like, we wouldn't have been able to get, food in or anything. And so
yeah.
October 3rd it is. It'll be an early fall wedding. We're super excited. It's crazy.
That's incredible.
I have this little wedding planner that tells me like the wedding's only 123 days away. Like, I don't stop telling me that.
Yeah, we had that stuff too. Like we were planning our wedding while you and I were still in grad school.
Right, I remember.
And like somebody gave us like a binder thing, but we also got on, what was it, the knot, I think?
Yeah.
And it was a constant like countdown, and I mean it is a challenge to plan a wedding, but and then what's really weird. No, I'm not gonna say this. No, I'm gonna say it. You like put all this effort into the thing, and then you literally get to the next day and you were like, that's it? And not that that's it, like it was disappointing, but that's it in the sense of what everybody tells you and you never believe. The whole weekend or event will take place in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And I mean, just do everything you can to literally drink it in as much as you can. Stop, look, listen, smell, like pause, take mental pictures. I mean, it just goes by so fast, and I didn't believe anybody, but it did.
Yeah. We are excited. I'm trying to keep all that stuff in mind. The good news is we've got a lot of, friends and family that are being super helpful. And we nice. Are in the process of buying a house as well right now. And so we just went ahead and got a wedding planner because it's too much to try and buy a house and plan a wedding and all that stuff, especially planning a wedding from like a whole state line away in the middle of a pandemic.
So. Yeah, we had ours was like a little different. We were planning the wedding for here in Nashville where we live, but both of our families were in South Carolina.
Ooh.
So we were at the right place, just everybody else wasn't.
Right. Complicated things.
Yeah. And we bought a house in the meantime as well.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We before we started recording, you were saying there was a little, what'd you say, a woodpecker or something pecking on one of your doors? Like,
yeah, we have we're in an apartment right now just because that's kind of where we had to land with everything. But there was like a bird, a woodpecker that was like pecking on the glass on the back door, and it scared me half to death because I was like, why is somebody banging on our front door? And then I realized it wasn't our front door, and then I looked around and there's this bird just staring at me wide-eyed through the window like, what?
Yeah, I feel like it literally knocking on the door would be even more like confusing because you'd keep, if it was the front door, you keep opening it up. What is this prank that's happening?
Right. Yeah. Very, very strange. Strange omens, strange times. Like, that has to mean something, but I'm not going to venture to guess what it is.
But when you said that, like, you had that noise going on, so we bought a house, we moved into the house, we're here now. Pandemic has been going on, so both Leanne and I are working from home. I set up shop with a desk in our living room right in front of our front window, which is approximately, if I had to guess, 8 feet from the road, something like that. And our neighborhood is still getting developed. And so there's just been several times where I'm on a video session with a client and like a giant flatbed semi will pull up in front of our house and like let down these big iron ramp thingies. I don't know what to call them. And a big old backhoe will like drive up on it. Or like some days the landscaping crew will come through and a guy with one of those awesome backpack leaf blower Every time I saw one of those when I was a kid, I thought it was like Ghostbusters. But like a guy with like something like that will come and be blowing stuff like right on our front porch on the other side of the window, and I'm just telling the client, "I'm so sorry. It's just it is what it
Super
is. We're all
fun.
doing our best." Yeah, yeah. So I get it. I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about a movie.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Nice. So, what movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
Big Fish.
Big
Which is,
Fish.
another Tim Burton movie.
Yeah, you are becoming the resident Tim Burton therapist because you did Corpse Bride.
Yes.
You got this.
Yes. I have a real passion for him as a director and a writer and a human being. I also love that he, just chooses to like he pulls most of his stuff from like either from like old 50s 60s, like it came from the deep kind of horror movies or literature or folk tales, which I think is maybe what I love about him the most. But there was a point where I had a like Tim Burton bedroom with like Tim Burton clothing and bedspreads and framed posters just like
Wow. So would it be fair to say that you're a fangirl?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
That's totally fair to say. I think my love and admiration for his work has deepened and matured over the years. I no longer own like 7 Nightmare Before Christmas hoodies. But
Let me ask you this. In your time with Tim Burton, has he missed yet with you?
That's a hard question. I would say no.
Okay, let me do this. Let me fire some off.
Yeah.
And you tell me if it's a hit or a miss. Okay? And I'm going to go way back. I'm going to say Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Oh, big hit.
Yes. Oh, I love that movie. If nothing else for Large Marge.
Yes.
But all of the rest, yeah, as well. Beetlejuice.
Big hit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Batman, give me a break.
Yeah. I love Tim Burton's Batman. I have a real soft spot for that one. It's not necessarily my favorite Batman movie of all time, but I do like the way he approached that.
I do too, and it changed Batman.
It did.
Also, it might have been the first comic book movie that I ever saw. I think I may have seen it before Richard Donner's Superman.
I believe that.
So I think Edward Scissorhands.
I love Edward Scissorhands. That one is a hit. I'll tell you what, though, I don't find myself going back to that one as much as I do some of the other ones.
Really?
Yeah.
That one might be an interesting one to do on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you ever see Ed Wood? I feel like not a lot of people saw it.
That's honestly one that I got about halfway through, and I'm like, I can love Tim Burton and not have to watch Ed Wood.
Mars Attacks.
Yes, absolutely.
Did I like that one? That one might have been one that I just felt like this is a cartoon. This is weird.
Yeah, it's real weird. I love it in the way that, and I think maybe I had more of an appreciation for it as an adult because I know so much about like how Tim Burton grew up and where Mars Attacks came from. And it was, he was so obsessed with these, like The Thing and, the ooze and all that jazz. And so he wanted to make his own like cheesy, like cult horror movie as though it were from that era. And so that's what Mars Attacks is. And so I think if you place it in that genre as opposed to like a modern movie, I think it makes a little more sense. But there's also like, I think there's a real weird like wacky sense of humor there.
The part that sticks out so much to me is I think it was Sarah Jessica Parker's head on the dog's body.
On the dog. Yes.
Yeah. So you know what? I did not actually remember this one, Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah.
I did not. Yeah. I thought that was really good.
Yeah. That movie is actually, I think is actually pretty scary. I'm not a huge scary movie fan, but Sleepy Hollow is great. Um, yeah, I dig that
What
one a
did you
whole lot.
think of what did you think of his Planet of the Apes?
Uh, I didn't dislike it, but I felt kind of like it was like, well, I could take this or leave this. I didn't hate it, but I wasn't like, wow, this is
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I'm also not a huge Planet of the Apes fan to begin with, so like
I really like the new ones. The new ones are incredible.
I saw one of the new ones when it first came out in the theater, and I was pretty
Yeah,
impressed. So
yeah. Well, that leads us up to this one, Big Fish, 2003. We had some Tim Burton's come after. Oh, yeesh, Dark Shadows. Did you like Dark Shadows?
you know, I liked Dark Shadows, but I won't like sit here and tell you that's a great movie.
Yeah.
So, especially not like I think Big Fish is a real brilliant piece of cinema, and I think Dark Shadows is fun, but like a little inexcusable at times. Just
Here's what I felt like Dark Shadows was. I felt like it was the gathering of the Tim Burton players. So like Depp, Helena Bonham Carter, Eva Green, and like it felt a little. It didn't feel like there was enough there to make a 2-hour movie.
right. Yeah, that's kind of it. Felt a little stretched and forced
Yeah.
um, at
And then we
times.
had the Corpse Bride. What'd you think of Sweeney Todd?
I really love Sweeney Todd, but I also like I've always loved like I loved the play long before Tim Burton
Hmm.
ever did a movie or the musical play, whatever you want to call it. I also lived in London briefly and like made it a point to go find Fleet Street and like
Wow.
the whole thing. And so Sweeney Todd was something I was really well read up on before he ever approached it. And I think if anybody was going to do that movie justice, I think it's Tim Burton.
Who did it better? Who did it better for Sweeney Todd? Tim Burton or Andy in The Office?
Oh, there's a question I never thought I'd be answering.
We ask the hard-hitting questions here at Therapist
Yes,
Theater.
yes. I would say Andy took a real creative approach, I guess. But I'm gonna say Tim Burton, yeah, just edged him out on that one a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay, I'm only going to ask you about one more, and then we're going to jump into Big Fish.
All right.
I have not seen this one yet. I want to though. But Dumbo.
I actually shockingly, I haven't seen Dumbo either.
Okay.
I've heard really good things about it. My impression, because I know this is the thing, so Coraline comes up a lot because Henry Selick directed Nightmare Before Christmas, and
Yep.
Coraline often gets confused for a Tim Burton movie. But Dumbo, I don't think was ever like, even if you go back and watch the original movie, because everyone was like, oh, it's so dark. Like the original movie was real dark. I mean, it dealt with like alcoholic clowns throwing a baby elephant into a fire pit. Like it's
Yeah.
not real light subject matter.
Well,
So
and he gets separated from his mom.
yep,
Yeah.
and I think gets drunk at one point, and
Yeah, it was. It was. I was trying to think of that. It was either alcohol or drugs, but he's definitely hallucinating.
for sure, pink elephants on parade. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I will say Tim Burton does a social pariah better than anyone. So I really hate to be reductive sometimes, but like every single movie he does, the main character is almost always a social pariah.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think that he definitely has a very defined perspective.
yes. Yeah.
So let's do Big Fish.
Yeah.
From one animal to another. What was it? Let me say this, okay? I saw Big Fish when it came out. Liked it when it came out. I watched it this morning and like wept at the end.
Yeah.
And I told Leanne I don't remember this movie. I remember liking the movie. I don't remember it affecting me last time I watched it
Yeah.
like it did this time.
Yeah.
And that's probably because of life and growth and all of that good stuff. But
Sure.
this really is. And what's funny is I think that this is a movie that gets better on repeated viewings.
Yes. Yeah.
So what was it about this movie that made you want to talk about it?
So I think, being a therapist has certainly changed some of my perspectives on things in general. But the thing I love about Big Fish is that it's so centered around the human experience of stories and storytelling and how we relate to one another. In this movie, like my fiance and I sat down to watch it over the weekend, and because I haven't seen it in a little bit, and he ended up like hadn't seen it since 2003 also, and ended up crying super hard through the end. And I can hear him now. He's like, no, I didn't. But there were some tears, and I definitely had a lot of tears because it's so emotional. And I think especially now too, my parents are, round about 60, and I think now that I'm a little older, I have, some perspective on like, where I'm at generationally and everything else. But it's just, I think this movie, pound for pound, talks about storytelling and human relationships better than just about anything else I can think of. And that's in the therapy office. That's the primary lens I use with my clients is story. I do a lot of narrative therapy, and I'm always interested in how we talk about things, and what we choose to talk about, what we don't choose to talk about, and how the stories we tell about ourselves and about our lives. Um, so Big Fish is a real great example of that.
Yeah, I think that this movie is a great example of Brene Brown talks a lot about humans as a species being meaning makers.
Yeah.
And I think that this movie is a great example of that. Like
Mm-hmm.
you really see Edward, like regardless of the how much of these experiences that he talks about actually happened, you see him kind of put them in uh assign them significance and kind of like order them in his head, like he kind of is, writing his life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think, and I think it's interesting too that um he tells the same stories over and over again. That's Will's whole issue with it, is that he's like, I've heard this story like 1,010 times. But I think Will really, the older I get, the more Will really gets on my nerves at times. um it's like borderline. I almost put him up there with like That's Not Fair in the Labyrinth. Like,
Huh.
because he can't ever get out of his own head enough to like understand that this is how his dad relates to people, is through story. And
Let me ask you this.
yes,
The first time you saw it, did you identify with Will more?
I did a little bit, I think, because I have a dad who's a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I've had some of those feelings at some point in my life where, um, and it's really interesting. So I know we talked quite a bit about it, but I was an English teacher for a while, so you would think I'd be like, little me would be all about, um, the like storytelling and all that jazz. But I think when I was little, it felt to me like, oh well, my dad just repeats himself. But as I got older and started to make more sense of it, was like, oh, this is how my dad relates to other people, rather than telling them like, this is who I am as a person, or these are the things that I like, as a factual statement. He, uses these like stories about really significant points in his life to communicate meaning, um,
Hmm.
and about who he is, and about uh, relating to other people. That's his vehicle for doing that. And so I think that's, in a lot of ways, that's Ed's, that same type of thing. It's, he can say I love your mother, which is true, but the way he chooses to like, you know articulate and tell that story communicates a whole lot more than just saying, I love your mother.
Yeah, part of me kind of wonders too. Well, okay, so I was asking if you identified with Will a little bit more the first time you saw it, because I just kind of wondered if the natural progression of our lives kind of takes us from identifying with maybe one character in a story naturally to another character in a story.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think, just the way memory works, like we know that the way memory in the human mind kind of works is that in our 20s up and through parts of our 30s, we are busy trying to figure out like who we are and try to gather up our identity, and then we get to a point where we're making what's called those are autobiographical memories, and then after that, like, we're in the process of deepening those things and communicating those things. So I think particularly in this one, I think that um, moves along, follows with Big Fish thematically. But I
Yeah.
think you also
And
you just have more perspective.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and then when you were talking about, I guess, like your dad telling stories, I was thinking about Edward in the movie, and I kind of thought, I wonder if it. You mentioned it's a way of connecting, and I wonder if it gives maybe a slight bit of distance, maybe a little bit of separation, a little bit of a perspective shift that allows, I guess, Edward's character, maybe your dad, I don't know, to say things that they couldn't if it was just a straight, I'm saying now what I'm thinking and feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I don't think I'm doing my dad a disservice to say he would probably say that that's the
Hmm.
case for him as well. But I think so too. That's so much of what we do as therapists is try to help people find the words to express what they don't have a language for. But sometimes I'm a little bit of a showman. I enjoy a good story, and I think sometimes it means more and imbues things with a deeper and a richer um, color than just being direct.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember, when we were in grad school, whose class was this? Maybe for some reason Dr. Bradley is sticking out of my mind, but it probably wasn't. But I remember us talking about metaphor, like in the therapy room, and
Yeah,
I remember when that came up, I got really excited because I think I use metaphors probably more than I should in my regular in real life. And so I got excited to use them in the therapy space. But it's a way. It's exactly what I said before. It's like providing just a little bit of distance to where, because sometimes when you get really close to a sensitive issue, it's a little too vulnerable, and it's
yeah,
really tough for a person to, especially if that's what they're coming in for. It's really tough for a person to articulate how they feel around it or what they want. And so if you can use a metaphor, it kind of lets them take a step back and and maybe say or think or just get to that place that they couldn't get before.
right.
Um,
Well, and I think to your point, it gives you some space. It also gives you a universal language.
mm-hmm,
I could spend 4 sessions with a client trying to unravel some family dynamic. When they say, my parents or my family or my friends ignore the elephant in the room, I know exactly what that is. We all know
mm-hmm.
exactly what that is. And I don't have to spend, 4, 5, however many sessions, which gets really frustrating trying to nail down this specific thing. And maybe that looks a little different from family to family and it works a little different family to family, but like I know what that is, you know what that is, and it's a common language that we don't really have to think too hard about.
Oh, that's a really good thought. Do you think that it's not just a way of helping people connect with themselves, but it's also the universal,
Yeah.
like using certain images, using certain, I don't know, understandings, all of a sudden, no matter, what kind of family you had, you and I can get on the same page because we both understand the elephant in the room.
Yeah. And to some extent I think like those things shift a little bit culturally, but like by and large, even like if we can even translate a metaphor, usually culture to culture, we can still kind of piece those things together. Even if we don't have a literal common language, we can still make sense of, okay, like I know what the equivalent is here of that, or, yeah, I think I wandered off my point there, but I agree with you.
Well, culture to culture, and what's funny is like I have a few clients who are not, um, I guess I would say a traditional American culture. Like their families are from other countries, and even though they may have been born or raised here, their their familial culture is very different. And so, if we're talking family dynamics, for me to maybe try to understand what's going on as I would the family that I grew up in, or the family that you grew up in, is not going to work. And so in those cases, I've maybe tried to use a metaphor or even explained it, but have then asked, you know, that's what it would be like in my understanding. Is there an equivalent?
Yeah.
Or is that purely cultural, where there is not a one-to-one comparison?
Right. Absolutely. Well, and it's metaphors work for everything. I can use those for family dynamics, behaviors, emotions. I do quite a bit of guided imagery, and I had a client, like her metaphor for the emotional, sometimes people come up with like a red cloud, which, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that's one thing, but like this client had experienced their emotion as a blue blanket. Um,
Huh.
and so, that, just the heaviness of like being wrapped up in this like really uncomfortable piece of fabric, um, was very, uh, that really struck a chord with me, because that was I can't wrap my head around exactly what was going on within that client, but I can really understand what it would feel like if I was,
Mm-hmm.
in that space, and experiencing that physical sensation.
Yeah, if it was literal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what was it about Big Fish that kind of like stuck in your brain? Certainly storytelling, but tell me more.
I think it's I think it's kind of the whole movie, and I think it's, there's definitely fantastical elements, but there's a lot of truth to it too. And I think Edward in his youth is such a he's such a good, warm, loving, like super rich human being. It's just like, God, I want to know that guy, like, um he like they talk about, like, he purchases the town of Spectre to save it, and that's like not even a main point. It's a point in the movie, but that's like the movie's not about him saving this town. He just did it because it was the right thing to do.
He said
uh,
helping people makes him happy.
yeah. Yep. And that's, I think, I mean, if we could all be a tenth of that guy,
Yeah.
you know 1/1000th of that, I think we'd all be in really, really good shape. Of course, it's a movie, so, like, I don't have money to go buy a town and save it, but
Well, but I kind of wonder if he did, because I mean, I think one of the things that the movie really kind of leans on is the depiction of young Edward. I forgot the actor's name. Oh crud! Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor. Oh my gosh, Ewan, if you're listening, I'm sorry. When he is Ewan McGregor, for most of it, it is older Edward, Albert Finney, telling stories. And so I don't know if I could say for certain if any of these stories are true. I mean, certainly there's kernels of truth in them. So I don't know if he bought the town. Maybe it was meant to represent something.
yeah. I I've gone back and forth a lot because, like, obviously, by the end of the movie, we know that there are like shreds of truth to what he was talking about, and that he really did do some of these things, and he has the deed. They found the deed for Jenny's house, and so we know that at least like that in some way, shape, or form he was able to purchase because they find that contract. But
When did that? I missed that part. When was that?
yeah, so they only flash on it for like 2 seconds. You have to actually pause the movie and read it. When he's in his when they go into the shed, and his mom's like, you need, like, this was your dad's office. You need to start sorting it out. And it's this big
Yeah.
old mess. He pulls out this paper, and it says, I can't remember exactly what it says at the top, but it's a deed, and it has Jenny's name on it. And that's when he takes it to Jenny's house, and he's like, I just trying to get information. And then Jenny launches into the story about um how he saved the town. And that's what I find interesting about that piece too, is because it gets, I think it's real hard with the movie all jumping back and forth, but Jenny's actually the one telling the story about him saving the town. Ed's not telling it.
Hmm.
And so I think that means more to me, because what vested interest does she have in telling the truth or not telling the truth? But she's also, we could interpret it to death, like, are the kind of fantastical, like, Carl pushing her house back upright and all that jazz, like,
Mm-hmm.
is that Will's interpretation of it because these are who he's been told these people are, or is she being fantastical about it, or whatever. But I don't think it matters that Ed's stories, like, are totally, that's what Will gets hung up on. These things, there's no way you could have gotten a football field full of daffodils. Like, that's ridiculous, and that didn't happen. And maybe that's true, it didn't happen exactly that way, but the fact that he showed up and made a gesture and all of that, I think that picture probably says more about his love for her than does the, like, actual true facts. I mean, in my mind, I don't think it matters if he got 10,000 daffodils or 10 daffodils. It's that the picture that Ed chooses to paint um, is, I think, his way is a metaphor of who he was and what he did, and how he loved other people, how he cared about other people.
Well, maybe how he loved his wife, because even Jenny says later to Edward, there were two women in the world. There was, oh no, I forgot his wife's name. There was his wife, and there was everybody else.
Sandra K. Templeton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of, oh, also, when he first meets his wife, well, not first meets her, but when he first finds her after meeting her, after serving as a unpaid worker to Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the IMDb trivia for this says that the scene where he's daydreaming and the elephant poops beside him was not scripted. It was not planned. It actually just happened on set, and
It's amazing.
the camera people had to hustle to like go wide so they could catch it all. But when he gets to her at Auburn and he has the whole field full of daffodils and stuff, she's engaged to what was her fiance's name? Don or something. But it's the actor that plays Roy on The Office to have
Yes.
another Office tie back. That guy, the characters he plays, just has a lot of bad luck with fiancés.
Yeah, it would seem that way. Or maybe he just is kind of maybe it's just a typecasting thing. I don't know. But
Oh, like he has bad luck in real life, and they found out, and they keep saying he'll be able to show the emotion because he's gone through it.
he's gone through it. Yeah, I don't know. But it's she was engaged, and I mean, I have issues with this one as a therapist a little bit, because I'm like, oh, bad boundaries, like, not good boundaries. If someone's engaged, you don't you don't go like work 3 years in indentured servitude to then like stalk them and run them down and like go bang on their door. Like, who does that, but also like it's a movie, you know.
It's a movie, yeah. And I think that Sandra could have told him, you know, hey, I'm engaged, no thanks, you know. But there was something I don't know, there was something that she liked.
Yeah.
Um
Well, and I think Don kind of did himself in there by choosing to, you know, act with physical aggression, like because she had said, you know, I'm engaged, and kind of he came back a little harder and was persistent, and you know, Don responded in violence, which says quite a bit about how he's going to handle things. And um,
yeah.
but I think about it too, you know, we say all the time like, oh, I would die for, you know, I would die for my spouse, or I would, you know, I would take a bullet for you, I would throw myself in front of a car for you, or for my kids, you know, we say those things all the time. And so I don't think, you know, it's a terrible metaphor, um in the case of, you know, him, like, you know, I would take a beating for you, um whether
Yeah,
he
why did she asked him to not hurt Don? Why did she what was it about? Was it just because he had been in the oh, had he been in the army at that point? He had not. So what was it that made her think, "Oh, he's going to hurt Don?"
You know, I've thought about that, and I I don't know if it was like maybe the like because that scene is set probably in what, like the 50s or 60s, um,
Yeah.
and so I I don't know if it was something about the time that made her think that way, or if she like is, you know, if Dawn, this is like clearly probably not, I mean, I'm sure this isn't the first fight she's been in. So I'm, you know, maybe this is like a pattern behavior that she's seen in him and doesn't like want, you know, him to get the smackdown. So
Hmm.
I don't know. We have, the whole thing's a little weird, right? And it's a little, it's so I think this whole movie requires some, you can't think too hard about it, right? Because it loses. And I think the same is true for Ed's stories. And I think what Will misses is that if you think too hard about it, you lose the substance of it. Because the point is not so much in the details, but rather in that, you know, he fell in love with this woman, and you know,
Would do anything for her.
would do anything for her. And that is the meat of the story. And I think that's what he's trying to communicate. And their love is reiterated. I think they have one of the best love stories. I really do. But
Yeah.
you know, that happens sometimes. We end up in the wrong relationship, and sometimes it takes somebody else to come in and, you know, show us that, hey, there's another option. um
Well,
you
let
know
me ask you this, because this was something that I was thinking about towards the end of the movie, where I believe Will is sitting bedside with his father, and the doctor comes in, and he speaks with the doc just a little bit, talking about his relationship with his dad. He says something along the lines of, you know, we don't talk that much, and when I was a kid, Dad was never around that much, and so I know that it was not just in a fantasy, but I think in some other character's recollection. Wow, I almost sounded super country right there. Recollection. That's my accent coming out. That he was in some kind of traveling sales or something like that. Why is it? Because you can clearly see how much he loves Sandra. Why is it that if he loves her so much, that it could also be said that he spends so much time away?
I wonder, so he was a traveling salesman, right?
I think
I
so.
Yeah, so that's his whole thing, right? Like, is that he has to, I mean, if that's how he was making money, you know, maybe if you want to switch gears and talk about something like a love language for a minute, maybe his
Yeah.
love language is being a provider. And if that's, you know, he's realistically like, he didn't go to college. He spent those years working in indentured servitude in the circus, and like, I don't know how many options he probably had open to him, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's what he did and he was good at it, which I mean, he's, quite the charmer, that seems probably pretty suited to him. He said that there's a point in the movie where he said he like saved every penny he made so that he could buy Sandra, like, out and out, buy a house. And then bought that really, really lovely house. And then he had his own landscaping company for a while, that they have that shot where he,
Really early on, yeah.
yeah. And so he's, the other thing too, like, it seems like he's a hustler and wants to be a real good provider. Hustler in the sense that he does a lot of work, not that he's like taking people for a ride. But I wonder too, like, what Will's perspective is of it, that he wasn't around a lot. Was he gone Monday through Friday and was home on the weekends? Was he gone for months and months at a time? Was he like home for several weeks and then gone several weeks? Like, it's really hard to say.
Well, I
So
think that one thing that's pretty clear is whatever the details of his schedule were, that Will grew up feeling disconnected from his father.
absolutely.
And one of the things that I was thinking of too is that you see towards the beginning, and I think it's best evidenced when Edward is leaving the town of Spectre, this thing inside of him that says, I want to create the best life for me that I can. And that doesn't necessarily mean I want to have a wife and a white picket fence and 2.3 children and all of that, but I want to see the world. I want to adventure. I want to meet everyone. And so I kind of wondered at different parts of the movie if, maybe that, I don't know if I'd call it wanderlust, but certainly like lust for life,
Yeah.
maybe a desire to collect memories or experiences or whatever. If maybe that could have been a reason for the traveling, sales thing, because
Sure.
I get to keep moving.
Right.
And if whenever he did come home and he would regale, William with these stories, if maybe William perceived it as, I haven't seen Dad in forever, and all he wants to do is talk about him.
Yep. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I feel for, and like, Will finally get, by the end of the movie, I think he finally gets it. But he tells his dad throughout the movie, I don't know who you are. I only know 10% of who you are, and just tell me something real. And he's like, what are you talking about? I've done nothing but tell you the truth. Um, they're not, I think for the bulk majority, and I'm sure you're right, this probably started in early childhood for Will. They're not ever speaking the same language. And the problem is, like, with kids and with children, you have to be very, very clear. You have to be able to come out and say, I love you, I value you, you're important, I see you. And you have to be able to say it directly and show it directly. Like, you can regale an 8-year-old with this awesome, parable, story, metaphor, whatever, but like, and they may or may not get it, but that doesn't that's not how they connect with people. That's kind of an adult thing. And
Kids don't think abstractly.
no,
Kids
they
think
don't.
concretely. And
Yeah.
so these stories that, Edward is regaling are fantastic, but a lot of them are just that. They're fantastic. They have fantasy. And so while I'm sure that maybe Will can look back later and draw meaning, at the time, he probably just thought, I don't want to hear about this movie that you have lived.
Right.
I want to throw a ball.
Right. And so, on I do think Will carries the burden to learn to speak his dad's language. I don't think Edward at any point attempts to really, like, bridge that gap on his end. And so that's, I think where he went wrong. And like, what, if he was a real person and he was in my office, encouraging him to reach toward his son. And I think he tries to reach toward his son, but he, does the same thing over and over again and is like, hoping that he'll get it someday. And he does eventually. But, Will's making all this effort to try and connect with his father. They can't. I think Will's issues that he can't find a middle ground. Because you ask Ed to tell you the truth. He's not going to come out and say, oh well, you're right, I like Carl wasn't 30 feet tall, he was really like 7'2", I was kidding. Like, he's Ed's not going to come out and say that. But there's a lot of misconnections. It's kind of sad in a way, that I'm glad that they got, by the end of the movie, they finally get to have a real bonding moment. But I'm sure there was a lot of sadness and missed points of connection. Like,
I think something you said a second ago is really significant. That's William and Edward were speaking two different languages. And I think that, you followed up really quickly with, they kept trying to connect in the same way and they kept missing each other. And it makes me think, how many times in our own lives, especially with family members, oh my gosh, especially with family members, or maybe in, your romantic relationship, do you feel like you're disconnected? Like you're just not connecting and you really, really, really want it. And you double down using the same efforts that you have in the past, which thus far have left you feeling disconnected.
Yeah.
I think Adam Grant calls that the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
So it's the belief that, well, I've invested so much in this and it's not going the way I want. And so if I invest even more of the thing I'm investing in it, then things will turn around. And that's sometimes true, but it's not always true. And I think, it seemed like at different times, and maybe this is just Albert Finney's acting, but it seemed like at different times that when Edward would try to connect by telling another story and Will would cut him off, I've already heard it, or, hey, not right now, I want to hear something, he kind of had a little look in his face like he was confused, like, I don't get it. People love this. This is what I do. But it wasn't working with him. And in the same way, Will kind of dug his heels in and kind of demanded connection in a certain way from his dad.
Yeah.
And I think that in both cases, neither was willing to accept the other for who they really were.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard. I think we have to become multilingual in our relationships if we really want to deepen and grow with the people around us. I heard a quote a long time ago that when you marry somebody, and you lay in the bed at night, there's 6 people. I think we talked about this grad school. There's actually 6 people in the bed. There's you and your partner and their parents and your parents. Which is like a little silly, but
I think that was a scene from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh yes, you're right. But we have one way that we go about, and it's not just romantic relationships, but any significant relationship we have. Anytime we have a way that we go about doing things, and I think we get sort of tunnel vision and assume that the way we go about doing things is the way that everybody else goes about doing things to some degree, right? That there's like 80% of what I do is probably what other people do. And that's probably true for things like tipping your waitresses. I think most of us try to do that. But in relationships, you really get down to brass tacks. It's so easy to miss somebody and to miss meaning because, there's all this built up stuff we have in our heads, and we have to not only like know what our language is and how we approach things, but we also have to really like take a step back and look at our partners or our friends or our family really curiously and figure out how they come at things and what they mean and what their communication is like. And then we have to work and develop, ideally, in relationships, we develop a third language, which is something we only speak with that person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, whenever we come to a relationship, or the longer that time passes in one, like in the case of family that we've been in forever, we tend to have a lot of filters and lenses in our communication with that person. So, what could be a completely, innocent comment from one person, if it's said by another, all of a sudden has this very visceral meaning to it. So if your best friend, says something to you about your new haircut, you may like kind of knock him on the shoulder a little bit, like, yeah, you're ribbing me, whatever. But if you have kind of a strained relationship with a parent and you walk into their house and they say something about your haircut, then all of a sudden it's, the end of the world and you're mad at them forever, and you can't believe that they would have the gall to say something like that. And it's not the words that are doing that. It's the years traveled with the other person, and it's the filters that those years and experiences, the lenses that they've put on the way that you view that person.
Yeah.
And I would say that, that is the number one toughest thing to help people break through in healing relationships, is helping them to identify what those filters and lenses are, and helping them to see the other person differently.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, the way I talk with my clients about that is I talk about story. I tell, I like to use metaphor. I tell clients, when we think about our life story, we're given a pen and a pencil, and the pen is out of your hands. Like the facts and the details of where you were and when you were there and who you knew, those are written in pen. Like you can't change that. I can't change the year I was born. I can't change where I went to school. It already happened. But the way that we choose to talk about those things and the way that we choose to tell those stories, that's why we're given the pencil. We can always go back with more perspective and, especially for people who have really problematic relationships with family or who have suffered abuse, we can choose to write that in such a way that the pain isn't staying with you in the present. And for some clients that looks at rewriting, well, I had a dysfunctional relationship, and writing the truth in that and saying I had an abusive relationship. For some clients that looks like taking that pencil and, rewriting, I have a really problematic relationship with my mom, to, my mom is someone who struggles with a lot of things, and there's a way for me to approach her with some compassion and still have a healthy relationship with good boundaries. So.
And then, well, what else sticks out to you? I keep wanting to jump to the end because I watched it not too long before we started and I bawled my eyes out, but I don't want to jump there too quick.
I know. I love this movie. I think something else that jumps out is like there's a lot of family dynamics in Big Fish, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
Josephine, Will's wife, I think is an interesting character, and obviously there's a story being told but not spoken about, a generational thing, right? With like, he's Ed's dying, and then you have Josephine pregnant, so you have, one generation is on their way out, a new generation is on their way in. But Josephine understands how to speak both languages. She gets Will's language and she gets his dad's language, and she can speak both of those. And I think she tries quite a bit, and I don't know if she's ever really successful, but she tries to kind of knit those two things together for them.
That was something that I lost when I was talking about the lenses and the filters. It's a great example of it not being the words, because the same stories that Edward's telling to Will, like Will just wants to kick him to the curb, but he tells those stories to Josephine and she's enthralled. She like comes in to help tuck him in, sits down, wants to hear more. So it actually connects with her.
Yeah. And I don't think at any point either, because I can't remember exactly what they said, but Will's like, why are you encouraging him, or like, why are you doing these things? Like, those stories aren't real, right? And she's like, yeah. And she basically was like, yeah, I know, but that's not the point. And it kind of like, I think Will gets a little frustrated, and it kind of goes over his head a little bit. But I think she gets his mom too, because there's, with both Sandra and Ed, there's quite a bit of avoidance of things. Like, neither of them will ever really come out directly and tell you something. There's a lot of like dancing around and signals and things that kind of happen.
Yeah, I get the sense that maybe, certainly Edward is probably an Enneagram 7.
Yeah.
If you Enneagram. I don't know what Sandra be. Maybe she'd be the same thing. She might be a 9. I don't know. Peacemaker. But, I mean, Edward, it seems like, does not do well with pain. Like, he does well when there's difficulty, because certainly he even says to Danny DeVito at some point, you'll never meet somebody with more determination than me.
Yeah.
But difficulty is not pain.
Yeah.
Difficulty is just difficulty. And so if he encounters a challenge, he's all, roll my sleeves up, let me shovel this elephant poop. But as far as pain, maybe that was symbolic of this traveling salesman thing. You encounter something in one place and you keep moving.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting too, in that Josephine's her job is she's a photographer. And so I think she, like, in a literal sense, understands storytelling in a different way. I think Will in general, for a lot of reasons, just doesn't like stories at all. He's a very much like facts and figures and sort of.
But wasn't he a journalist?
I think so, but he never really seems to be interested in stories in the same sense that his dad is interested. Maybe stories is the wrong word. Maybe, metaphors, or.
Although, I mean, journalism and let's call them tall tales, very different types of storytelling.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, in fact, I would say they have opposing values. Like, right. I mean, certainly with journalism, you're trying to report the actual facts and what happened in a very clear, concise way. Whereas with the tall tales, you're trying to stretch them out. Like, I mean, the best example of that is when the doctor did come in to talk to Will and said, "Did you ever hear the story about the day you were born?" He's like, yeah, fish, wedding band, yeah. He goes, no, the real story. Although I had to keep, like, rewinding it because I thought he said the rail story. And I was like, oh, a story about a train. But that's not what he said. And he just says that, yeah, your dad was out of town on business and you were born a week early and he couldn't make it back in time. And that was it. That was the whole story. And he said something along the lines of, like, yeah, wouldn't you choose the fantastic one too?
Yeah. Well,
and there was something in that moment, I feel like, that really made Will connect with his father. Yeah. Like, hearing that story, you see him get that look in his eyes like, huh, oh my gosh, my dad was just a real guy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and Will says too, I actually wrote it down because I thought it was such a good quote from the movie. He says, most men, they'll tell you a story straight through. It won't be complicated, but it won't be interesting. And so
Edward said that.
Oh, yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
too many people. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's what the word says. And I think that there's, I find, I find value in both. I think as people, we want things to be as uncomplicated as possible, but that's just not the truth of relationships or of personhood. Um, and I think that's what I love about therapy. People are infinitely interesting and unique, and so, obviously, like, I'd never want to encourage people to just flat out lie about who they are or what they did, but I do think there's some room for color in things.
You know what's it reminds me of, I had a guest on the show last year named Nate Larkin, who is he has a podcast himself called Positive Recovery, and he works with guys with sex addiction. Um, and Nate said that whenever he is sponsoring a guy, he knows if you're here, you're an addict and you've got trouble telling the truth
Right.
due to shame, due to whatever it is. And so he said that when he takes on a new guy as a sponsee, he says, I want you to tell me as honestly as you're able to right now your story. And he says that he purposefully leaves some room there, knowing that the farther they travel in their recovery journey, the more connected with themselves they'll become, the more connected with their own story they'll become, and the more honest they'll be able to be.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, that is brilliant and graceful and understanding and compassionate and humanizing.
Absolutely. Memory is a fickle thing, like, even um, taking the behaviors and things that come with addiction, and the dishonesty. I see a lot of that same type of behaviors in my clients who have survived a lot of trauma. They have a really hard time coming to, the the truth of what happened with them, in the sense that, when someone goes through a lot of trauma, they um and live through the cycle of abuse, you tend to downplay the things that have happened to you, and you have a hard time sometimes believing, like, did that really happen to me, because you have somebody telling you that's not what happened all the time. So
Well, and to a certain degree, it's your brain trying to survive.
yeah, yeah,
If I kind of admit and integrate these things that have happened to me, I'm afraid of what will happen
yeah,
to me on the inside.
yeah. And so too, and what does that mean for me? I have a lot of clients who've echoed some type of sentiment, like, well, if I say that this was an abusive relationship, then what does that mean? Because I stayed in it for so long, and what does that say about me? And does that mean that I asked for it, or that I participated? Um, so that's where I think, working with stories with clients is so important, because the client gets to choose. Do you, even language like calling yourself a victim or a survivor? I have some clients who find power in both, or find power in swapping one out for the other. But that's, at the end of the day, that's I, in my mind, why we have a lot of mental health issues, is because we can't reconcile our own narratives.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, even a person wrestling with trauma, I stayed for longer. What does that say about me? Is it this? Is it that? That is you telling yourself stories. You're trying to make sense of the story that you lived, and you're trying to find your place as a character within it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is not easy, because whenever trauma happens, whenever things are perpetrated upon a person, it very rarely is something that's going to make sense.
Yeah. Well, and it's so, and we know, like, what our memories do around trauma. It's even more complicated by the fact that a lot of people don't remember specifics, or they don't remember
Mm-hmm.
the before and the after. And some people have memory gaps. And so, with clients is like, do you need to know? Do you need to know exactly what happened for that, day or a week or a year? Or can you choose to say, this part of my story is not so important as the part where I survived and I'm doing okay now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about the ending.
Okay.
Or try to, at least. So the ending was coming up. It was at the part where that was happening, and Leanne had come downstairs to make lunch, and I walked into the kitchen and I said, "Can you come watch this with me?" And she got on the couch and she goes, "You're not going to make me watch. This is sad, isn't it? You're going to make me watch something sad." I was like, "No, it's not sad. It's beautiful. Also, can you hold my hand?"
Yeah.
So throughout the movie, we've seen all of these stories that Edward has told. And maybe one of the first ones was when he was I don't think he was like a kid, but he was a kid, and he had some friends, and they decided to go to a spooky house in their neighborhood and confront a witch that lived there, or at least a lady who they believed to be a witch.
Right.
Who had, was it a fake eye or just a bad eye? She had an eye that could like see the future.
Yeah, I don't know if she had like a cataract or some damage, but her eyes is kind of like milked over or like white. That yes, if you look straight into her eye, it will tell you how you're gonna die.
Yeah, so him and his two buddies went and they saw how they were gonna die, and he saw how he was gonna die, but the movie showed the two friends. They did not show Edward what he saw, and he just kind of calmly went, "Huh, that's how it is. Well, now I know," or something like that.
Yeah.
And at least one time throughout the course of the film, maybe twice, somebody asks him about it. "Hey, how is it? How are you going to go?" And he said, "It's a surprise. I don't want to spoil it for you."
Yeah. Well, and I had this moment of thought while I was watching the movie, because he's stuck in that forest, and like the trees have tangled him up, and he says to himself, and he's like stuck and he's lost, and he says, "This isn't how I die." And immediately the trees drop him and he finds his way out of the woods.
Yes.
And I was like, man, oh man, if that isn't like the strength and the level that our problems have over us sometimes, and as soon as we can stop and take a breath and say, this isn't the end of me, it gets so much better. And I'm like, this is the moment that, like, when I see my clients having like an aha moment in therapy, that's what it is. It's them being able to say to themselves, this isn't how I go, and then they are released from the trees.
Yeah.
And they find out.
When I saw that, so my primary client base are men with sex addictions. And when I saw that, I couldn't help but think, so many times when a person with addiction issues decides to act out with whatever it is that the addiction is to, be it a substance or a process or behavior, it's because they're experiencing feelings on the inside that are so intense that they don't feel like they can survive it.
Yeah.
And so they need to numb them. They need to, it's a way of self-regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene with the trees and the vines and stuff is such a beautiful visualization of that, because you could say that represents anxiety. You could say it represents tension. You could say it represents conflict. You say it represents whatever you want, but realizing that this will not kill me. And I've told so many clients that nobody has ever died from a feeling.
Yeah.
Like, your feeling is not going to kill you. You just have to ride the wave. You have to realize this is temporary. It's like the weather. It's not permanent. It's not going to last forever. And so I'm going to do what I can to care for myself in the middle of it. And I'm going to outlast it. And I think in that moment where he said, "Oh, this isn't how I go," it took the power out of the situation. It deflated it.
Yeah. And, realistically, like he probably wasn't actually like being strangled by trees, but it doesn't matter because when we're in those moments, that's how it feels.
Yeah. And if we go metaphor, he had taken a shortcut. He was in the middle of a forest. He probably felt lost. He probably felt lonely. And in the addiction world, there's an acronym called HALTS, HALTS, never let yourself get too hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or scared. Because when you do, you're more susceptible to acting out.
Right.
And so because lonely is one of them, like that, it would make a lot of sense that tension, that anxiety inside of him would be rising up. It would be growing to where he needed to do something to help regulate himself. And even just gaining that perspective of, oh, this isn't going to kill me.
Right.
That was enough.
Right. Well, and that's, I think, any maladaptive coping strategy, whether it's, avoidance of an issue or it's, binge eating or purging or distraction. Gosh, I talk to so many clients. It's just about distraction cannot be your only coping strategy. There's nothing wrong with, if you're having a really rough day, dipping out into Netflix or a video game or whatever for a while. If that is the only way you know how to cope, then it gets real tough to actually deal with your emotions because you just end up getting deeper and deeper into that forest. And it's one of the situations where you don't really realize how deep in it you are until you turn around and you're like, oh my God, I have no idea where I even, where I am with this. And
I always say that's the difference between rest and doing nothing.
Yes.
Because sometimes Netflix can be rest, but I think the difference there is intention.
Yeah.
Like, I had a rough day. I really want to watch, I don't know, insert something on Netflix here to laugh and to feel better versus, I'm just going to turn something on and before I know it, it's 3 hours later and I have no idea what happened.
Right. Absolutely.
And all I'm trying to do is really just not be present.
Yep. So
we got to talk about the end. We got to get to the end. So
to the end.
He tells all these stories.
Right.
Will gets a call or he goes home. Somehow he finds out Edward had a stroke and he's in the hospital.
Yeah.
So he goes and sits bedside. And then at some point his dad wakes up and I don't know how, but I think maybe both of them knew that it was his time.
Yeah. Well, he says, tell me how it happens. And Will says, I don't know that I don't know. You never told me that part of the story. And he just kind of tells him like, just tell me how you think it should go. Or, tell me just tell me.
Well, this was the major connection point that I thought in the movie. Will immediately goes towards like the I don't know, the logical kind of, he goes to reach for the nurse's button and his dad says no. He goes to offer his dad some water and his dad says no. And he says, what do you want? That's when his dad says, tell me how it happens. And he goes, you never told me. How do you think it would go? And then I think maybe all his dad gets out is the river.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then I think Will just kind of realizing what his dad wants, chooses not only to engage his dad where his dad was at, but to speak his dad's language.
Right.
And it was this first, I thought, moment of, I'm no longer going to ask you to come to me. I'm going to go to you.
Yeah.
And so Will weaves this tale, or he says, how does it start? And his dad says something about the wheelchair or something.
Yeah.
And it was just that prompt. And then Will goes.
Mm-hmm.
And he spins this beautiful story of their escape from the hospital, his transportation of his dad in his dad's prize Dodge Charger to the river, where every character from every story that his dad has ever told is there.
Yeah.
And as he picks his dad up to walk him down to the river, people are waving and they're cheering. And this line that Will says, like, got me good. He says something along the lines of like, there wasn't a tear or a frown around. Everyone was smiling.
Yeah.
They were all happy to see you.
Yeah. That whole scene, like the way he narrates it, the way they shoot it, it's really interesting because they pan over everyone and you see Jenny, and they have to do another shot to get the witch in because Helena Bonham Carter plays both. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I saw something somewhere that's like, it's a cartoon, but someone's like, hey, Tim Burton, did you know that there are other actors in the world other than Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter? And he's like, why hasn't anyone told me?
I think a more accurate cartoon would have been like, yeah, there's Eva Green.
Yes, that too. But
Because once he broke up with Helena Bonham Carter, that's who he decided to start dating.
yeah, absolutely. But it's gosh, I think it would be, I think we and I know obviously this is the story that he tells, but it comes true at, his dad obviously passes away in the funeral, to be so beloved. And that is the part that is true, is that his dad was so deeply loved. And I think, probably what he saw when he was young is that, he was gonna get to go and be surrounded by people who love him and have lived a really good life.
You're talking about that's what he pictured for himself,
Yeah.
Edward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're leaving out a big part, and that is that William carries his dad down to the river where his mom, Sandra, is standing in the water. And as he walks into the river, Edward takes off his wedding ring and hands it to his wife and
He takes
kisses
it
her.
out of his mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, and then William lets him go into the water, and he turns into a giant catfish.
Yeah.
And swims away. And he says, in the end, you became exactly what you always were, a big fish.
Yeah.
And then it kind of moves back to the hospital room where Edward dies outside of the story in the real world.
Yeah.
And then the funeral happens. And I think at the funeral, it's, William seeing people show up that he immediately recognizes as the characters in the story.
Right.
The giant's there, not quite as big as he was. The circus, what do you call that guy?
The ringmaster.
Yeah, the ringmaster. Yeah. The twins, Steve Buscemi.
Yeah.
I'm really bad with character names.
Northern
Mr. Pink. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is so true, and yet hearing you say it, I feel sad and grief-stricken because William was able to see how much his father was loved, and yet I think that it would be true to say that he never felt loved by his father.
Yeah.
And I can't help but feel sad because I think in the end he did connect with his father, but it was just this like very end, last couple minutes of his dad's life.
Yeah. It's I feel so much. It's a complicated thing, right? Like, it's his relationship with his dad, and I think there's some really pretty shades to it, and I think there's a lot of really, really, really sad shades, because I think you're right, and I would like to think, if I could have it any way I wanted, that maybe when he's connecting with all these people at the funeral, that he's able to hear from, if not from his dad himself, but again, hear stories, your dad talked about you all the time.
Yeah. Oh, that would be beautiful.
I would like to think that he gets some kind of closure there, around that. And that's my headcanon. So.
Yeah. And I think that this is an example of the ways that I think the whole language of this show is mental health and relationships through the lens of movies and pop culture, I think this is where movies fall a little short, because I think that Hollywood would tell you that even just Will seeing these people, talking to these people, and hearing stories of his dad, it would make him know his dad more. I feel like Hollywood would tell you that's enough.
Yeah.
But I think that where that falls short in real life and with real emotion is that's giving you the biography of your dad.
Right.
That's giving you all of the content and none of the process. Like,
Absolutely.
he still missed out on a lifelong relationship with his dad, and I can't help but think the grief that he was already experiencing from the loss would be magnified by hearing about all these other people's experience. And in some ways, like in the case of him buying Jenny's home, him doing these incredible things for people, and yet, I never got to throw a ball with my dad.
Right. It's I think you're right. I think it's there, I'm sure there would have been a tremendous amount of grief and loss. And I think in some ways, before his dad had passed, I've talked frequently about absentee grieving, the grieving of a relationship or of a person who for whatever reason can't can't be there for you, whether that's because the original work came out of a therapist work with clients with dementia and their family members, because obviously, your family member with dementia isn't dead. You're not grieving the loss of their, physical person and their consciousness, but of the fact that, like, they don't know who you are anymore. They don't have a
Yeah.
relationship with you anymore, because that's what dementia does. It takes, among many, many other things, it takes that from people. And so you're grieving a loss in the fact that your relative doesn't know who you are anymore. And so I think in a lot of ways, when we're trying to or be in relationships, or when we're in, have family members who, for whatever reason, because they have wanderlust or because they don't know how to come out and say it or whatever, can't reciprocate that relationship with us, we have grief work to do a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And so then you physically lose that person. You're losing, Will lost any hope of repair or, deepening of that relationship with his father, because he's gone. And I think maybe the way because he we see the big fish in the swimming pool at the end when he's telling these same stories to his kids. Maybe that's how he reconciled that loss, is by, figuring out who, how his father could have some meaning in his life even after he's gone.
Yeah. The stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Tell me something that your clients have taught you.
That's such a good question. I think, if anything, my clients have taught me to have a tremendous amount of respect for the human condition. Um, I think I know, you get to a point where you're like, well, I've heard, I sit with, for people who missed the last episode, the bulk majority of my clients are trauma survivors. And so, you think you hear it all, and you get kind of, and that's certainly not all I do, but, you get kind of, I don't know, numb or detached from things, because I've sat with some really, some people who have been in some really, really god awful situations, but there is such a richness to human experience, and it's a real gift, for me, for my clients, allowing me to sit and be a witness to some of the hardest things that people experience, but also, some of these really beautiful, intimate, internal moments we have with ourselves. And so I think I approach people and I approach things with a lot more, not just compassion and empathy, but with a lot more respect and a lot more curiosity, for who people are and what they experience, and by that same token, what their stories are, because everybody's got some weird, interesting little kernel going on that, if you can find it, is really a special thing.
Yeah. And I think that if you can really lean in and you're able to access your emotions, then that's the basis for empathy, and that's how we connect.
Yeah.
Is to understand, no matter how different our backgrounds, no matter how different even our present lives are, as we've both got a bad case of being a person.
Yeah.
And because of that, we have so much in common. Tell me something that you're doing to take care of yourself.
I have been this is a rough time.
It is. And maybe this is a good chance for us to like hone in on that, because I think right now we need self-care more than anything.
It's been hard. I will say in general, I do a lot of yoga. I know for me and myself, and I'm very open with my clients about this. I have a hard time sitting with myself sometimes and sitting in my physical body, and yoga has been so tremendously healing. I mean, I love the health benefits and the fact that like I'm stronger today than I've just physically than I've ever been in my whole life. But you know, can't do yoga and try to exist outside of yourself because you'll quite literally fall flat on your face.
Yes.
So I like that. Recently, I've really taken a break from social media. I think I know that when I have to sit with clients with hard stuff, and then, you know, I log on and see, you know, the same, you know, my friends and family who are dealing with the same stuff and the same handful of posts, the same handful of content over and over and over again, which is not to knock anybody in my life, but I can't separate out from it. And I know that for me and for myself, I have some friends and family members and colleagues who, you know, really have been using social media to connect, and that's been a real lifeline for them at times. But for me, I've got to dip out so that I can be authentic and present with the people who I'm physically seeing, and have to connect with as a therapist and as a person. I feel like if I'm on social media right now, I can't control myself because I want to just do the endless scrolling thing, but also I'm not really being fair to my clients or to my friends and family who I do have physical contact with.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was a time not too long after I moved into my new office that I had a client coming in at whatever time it was. And in the 10 minutes, 5 minutes before that session, I started going through Twitter, the newsfeed, or whatever it was. And I saw something that just rocked me. And I remember after that session calling Leanne and saying, I cannot do that in between sessions. Like, I cannot engage in social media in between, because I saw this thing that totally took me out of the present moment. And I had to fight myself to get back into it during the session.
Yeah. It's tough. It's really, really tough.
Related to your yoga comment about, you know, your mind can't be somewhere else outside of your body during that. So right before quarantine, I got the DDP yoga DVD set.
Nice.
Because I've been wanting to try it for a long time. Like I have loved yoga every time I've done it, and I don't have a better reason for wanting the DDP yoga set other than I really liked him as a professional wrestler, and he does it, and I don't need a better reason than that. Whatever. But the first DVD in the series is him just literally going through and showing you the moves. That's it. That's the whole first workout. But he does it semi-quickly, and he'll call out the name of the move, and he'll show you, and he'll demonstrate as well as other people in his group. And then all the while him saying, you know, as you're doing this, do not look at me. You should not be looking at me. You should be having your neck in a neutral position, your spine in a neutral position. I'm like, but I don't know any of these moves. I can't. And I'm on the floor, and the TV is over there, and I know that, and it's like it's not great feeling for my neck to have it craned and trying to look at the TV. But I'm like, how do you learn if you're not like looking up there?
Oh, absolutely. It took me, so like I talk about yoga a lot because it's my favorite thing. I've been doing yoga off and on for about a decade, and then I have not missed a practice in 3.5 years at this
Wow.
point. So I try to remind people, like, when I first started doing yoga, I felt the exact same way, and there are still things that I struggle to do, and there are yoga poses that I'll probably never be able to do, and that's fine. And the thing I love about yoga is, like, because I do a little bit of like high intensity interval training too, like that's a very measurable thing. Either I do the same number of push-ups I did last time, or I don't, or I do more, which is great, or I do less, which is whatever. But with yoga, like, if I can't do something today because it's not available within my body, that's okay. And I think that's a really important lesson for me, and for my clients who have a yoga practice as well, because it's not for everybody. But I think that's a really important lesson to keep in mind from a mental health perspective, is that just because I managed my depression last time I had a depressive episode doesn't mean that I can manage it in the same way this time. And that's totally okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you've failed to do something, just means that you're a person.
And it really, I think, demonstrates the struggle to remain in the here and now.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in recovery, there's a cliche that says, yesterday's recovery is about as good as yesterday's shower. Like, yesterday's shower was great for yesterday, but that's yesterday. So what do you got today?
Yeah.
Use what you got today. So let's say that somebody was listening to our conversation today and that they just want to connect with you and want to become your client. What's the best way they can get a hold of you?
So that is my email, which is agregoric@holisticconsultationllc.com. So it's a long one, but my last name is Gregorek. Holistic consultation is my group practice. If I'm not a good fit, there's definitely, if people are in the Columbus area, the Ohio area, we have a ton of great therapists on staff. So
yeah, and we'll throw that down in the show notes. So just in case you got trouble spelling Andy's last name, that's okay. Swipe up in the podcast app, you'll see it there. You can click on it. Andy, I just think the world of you, and I not just as a professional, not just as a therapist, but as a friend. You were one of the very first people I met in grad school, and I'm just so glad to get a chance to talk with you and hear about the upcoming nuptials, and I would say hear about the move, but I don't even know if you've gotten to really experience the move so far, thanks to quarantine and social distancing. So I'm going to be cheering for you that you can see Columbus one day.
Thank you. I packed up my house and was here for about 5 days before everything got locked down. So
yeah,
one day I will tell you, this is like a fun little piece of interest. We've been doing a lot of outside stuff, which is what we can do right now. We've been there's a lot of natural bogs in Ohio where carnivorous plants grow wild. So that's been our,
like Venus flytraps.
Yeah, not Venus flytraps don't grow here, but sundews and pitcher plants grow wild here. So we've been doing a lot of that.
And when you say carnivorous, I mean they're eating insects. Are they actually eating things with muscle and like meat?
Like certain pitcher plants and some Venus flytraps, I think if they get really big, will be big enough to like eat, I don't know, like a small, like a bee, but not really. I think it's primarily insects. That's my fiance is extremely passionate about carnivorous plants, and I'm sure he would tell me. But it's they're mostly insects, but that's what happens, right? Is they break down what little protein the insects do have to kind of feed, because they exist in places where there's like no nutritional value in the soil. That's why they've kind of evolved the way they.
I think I used to know that, but it fell out of my head. So to hear it again is really interesting.
Yeah. So
also, one of my favorite movies, and musicals of all time is Little Shop of Horrors. So
yeah, that's a good one. We actually have a bog, a carnivorous bog out on our back patio with several different types of things in it that we just grow on our porch for fun, because we're weirdos.
I love it. Well, Andy, thank you so much for coming on. Can't wait to have you back for round 3.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and catch up and reconnect. And I love what you've got going on here. I think it's a really good way to give people some insight into what we do and hopefully encourage them to seek therapy when they need it.
Oh, yeah? All right.
Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.